Let's talk about KPIs, key performance indicators. Let's talk about what they are, how to effectively implement them, some common examples of how they actually work, and common mistakes that teams can make that end up making KPIs completely useless. So KPIs are one of those terms that gets thrown around so much that they've almost lost meaning. But at their core, KPIs are measurements. They're specific and they're quantifiable, right? They're signals that tell you how well you're progressing towards a specific goal, right? So KPIs, they're not the goal themselves and they're not vanity stats either. They're the bridge between the goal and the results, what you want to happen and what's actually happening along the way. When used correctly, KPIs help you make decisions. They turn that gut feeling into real hard data. And they create accountability, not in like the micromanagement sense, but in the sense of like, we can see what's really working. So what are KPIs and what are they used for? KPI is a measurable value that shows whether you're achieving a key objective. Think of it as a signal light on your dashboard, right? It tells you if something's going well, something needs attention, or it's about to break or breaking, right? Hopefully you get to it before it breaks. So for example, right, if your objective is to increase your customer retention, then your KPI might be focused on your monthly churn rate, right? And if your objective is to improve code quality, a KPI might be something along the lines of the number of critical bugs in production per release. So a good KPI, it's three things. It's specific, it's measurable, and it's tied to a business outcome. So they not only help to align teams, but they also track your activity. Now let's talk about how to implement KPIs, okay? So we'll walk through the actual implementation process here. So the first step is going to be define the business objective, right? We're not starting with the metrics, we're starting with the why, okay? You gotta ask, what are we trying to improve and why does it matter? Our next step is going to be to identify the leading and lagging indicators for that KPI, right? Lagging indicators tell you what already happened. Those are things like revenue or churn rate. Leading indicators, those are the things that predict what's going to happen, like the number of demos booked or things like NPS trends. You need both. Lagging tells you the outcomes, leading helps you steer in the right direction before it's too late. So the third step is to make them measurable and owned. Okay, a KPI has to have a few key things. It needs a formula, a data source, an update frequency, and an owner, right? The person or the team that's responsible for tracking and improving it. Because without that ownership, the KPIs are just going to sit in dashboards and collect dust. Step 4 is going to be setting realistic targets, right? So we don't want to say something like just grow engagement. That doesn't help. What we want to say is increase the active users by, 10% in Q4, right? It's a specific, measurable result. The targets should kind of stretch the team, but still be very attainable with that focus and that effort. We want to make sure we're hitting those targets. And then finally, step 5 is going to be to review and to adjust. Okay, so KPIs, they're not permanent. If the business shifts, the indicators should shift too, right? You got to revisit them quarterly or at any major points really along the road, right? The KPI that mattered 2 weeks ago, it might have now become irrelevant, or worse, it could be misleading based on your new business goals. So let's take a look at a couple practical KPI examples across different teams. And remember, you really shouldn't have any more than 3 or 4 KPIs per team. Otherwise, they're no longer key performance indicators. They're just indicators and metrics. So for something like engineering, you might look at mean time to recovery after incidents. That's how long it takes you to get back up and running. Or deployment frequency, how often new features are going out, or even defect rate per release when you have issues after you release things. For product, we could look at other things like the feature adoption rate, right? Specifically within a set window of time, or active users per feature, or even customer satisfaction. And there's a lot of good scores for that, like CSAT, CSAT, or NPS scores. For sales and marketing, you could look at things like customer acquisition cost, how much money you have to spend to get a new customer. Lifetime value, how much money they bring in over the course of a customer's lifetime with your company. Or even conversion rate from lead to customer. That's always a good metric to pull from. On the operations side, look at things like average response time to internal requests or SLA adherence. That's an often overlooked one. Another one would be cost per transaction. The point here, it's not to track everything, right? It's to track the things that are really moving your business forward. All right, so pitfalls to avoid. There's a few common traps here that can really kill your KPIs early. The first is trying to track too many things at once. If you have 5, 6, or even 10 KPIs per team, you're no longer measuring, you're just drowning in data. You're not getting the useful things out of it. You really need to focus on what's actually driving the outcomes and not just things that are easy to count. The second is if you confuse activity with performance. Okay, so number of meetings held is not a performance metric. It's just an activity. It's a vanity metric, right? Performance is about outcomes, things like time from decision to delivery. So from an engineering example, commits to a code base, right? That's a vanity metric. It's easy to inflate and it doesn't tell you anything about the value actually being added. The third is not connecting your KPIs to business goals, right? If your CEO can't look at your KPI and immediately understand how it affects revenue or growth or customer satisfaction, it's probably the wrong metric. Fourth is then not acting on them. And this might seem obvious, but it's really important. Your KPI, it's only useful if it's changing your behavior or driving some kind of behavior. If you're not using it to make decisions, then all you have is a chart. And that's not the point of a KPI. So when implemented correctly, KPIs really help you to get clarity, especially for leadership, but also to teams and to individuals. They make strategy measurable and they make progress visible, right? The trick is not just to measure what's easy, but to measure what matters.